this Holy Week, and traditionally, Christianity will maybe not celebrate, but we'll follow Jesus on his way to the cross and carrying the cross and that. And but as usual, I thought we would part from tradition and celebrate the life of Jesus. Okay, hold on. And part of the reason is because from Aramaic, from the ancient Near Eastern perspective, Dr. Lamsa, is that we focus more on Jesus' life, Jesus' humanness as a human being, and so we're just going to focus on his life as he lived it while he was here on earth, and celebrate what he did, what he taught, and his lasting effect on the world, essentially, for the last 2,000 years. So now this is going to be real light with comments. I'm not going to do a lot of scripture. I will refer to scriptures, but we're just going to kind of walk with Jesus. And once again, if you have any comments or whatnot while I'm going, and particularly tonight, because I don't have to run through and remember this and that. But if you do and you have any questions and you say, wow, I didn't know that or whatnot, feel free to jump in. But remember, you have to unmute yourself first, which is easy, of course. Okay, so and as we do this, as we walk with Jesus through his life on earth, let's remember his core teachings. Love God, love your neighbor, love your enemies, because this was the heart and soul of Jesus' teachings. And Jesus demonstrated love throughout his lifetime on this earth and throughout his teaching mission. So, all right. Well, so we're going to start, and we're not going to do all the doctrine and all that kind of stuff. We're just going to kind of just get an idea of who he really was. Okay, so Jesus was born into a common family. Okay, we could use the word poor, I guess, back then, but I just used the word common. And he was from Nazareth in Galilee. Now, I put the map here just so you could get an idea of where. Okay, Nazareth, Galilee is up here in the north, remember, and Nazareth is right here. If you can see my cursor, but it's up there. And Jerusalem, which is part of Judea, is down here. Now, just a couple significant things to mention here is that notice it is about, from Nazareth to Jerusalem, I think was about 90 miles, give or take. All right. And remember, they went there yearly. for atonement, to do their sacrifices and atonement for sins. And if you notice, to get to Jerusalem, they had to pass through Samaria. And it's just some interesting notes here, because the Jews from Judea, they hated the Samaritans. Okay, the Samaritans had broken off from the Jewish faith, and so they hated them. But bear in mind that when Jesus had to go to Judea, and they walked. Okay, poor people didn't have horses or even donkeys. They walked. So they walked the 90 miles from Jerusalem. I mean, from Galilee to Jerusalem through Samaria. So that's just a little background, so you can see, when they say Jesus went to Jerusalem, well, okay, he walked. And then most of his teachings were around Galilee. And of course, he walked in Galilee. Sometimes he got in a boat and the Sea of Galilee. So, and the other thing to remember about the background that Jesus was born into, Galilee as well as Judea, was occupied by the Romans at that point. So the people were under two governments essentially, because the Jewish authorities, remember that was the government too. It wasn't just a religion. That was the government. Okay, and then the Romans also were there, and of course, people were taxed by both the Jewish government and the Romans, and it made poor people, especially from Galilee, were very oppressed. Anyway, so all right, now Jesus' religion. Remember, Jesus was Jewish. Okay, now Jesus was Jewish by faith. All right, now you do know, and you hear where they wanted to say that he's from the line of David. But anyway, when he was born, he's Jewish by faith, and so he was circumcised 8 days after his birth, was presented to God in the temple at Jerusalem, made his, I used the word confirmation, but bar mitzvah at the age of 12, and you see that in the Bible. Okay, at the age of 12, he went to Jerusalem, and remember, he got lost, and then his parents finally found him, but he stayed at the temple after he had his bar mitzvah to discuss religion. Okay. From the age of 3, Jesus studied the Torah at the local synagogue or school. Technically, they didn't have schools like we did, but they could have something like that. In those countries, boys started to study at the age of 3 or 4 and continued their studies until they were acknowledged as rabbis, doctors, and teachers. And another thing to add in here, normally it was at the age of 30 that the men were acknowledged as rabbis or teachers, but that's the age of maturity when they could go out and teach. So Jesus was born, reared, and truly trained in the bosom of Judaism. No doubt he and his family belonged to the prominent sect of the Pharisees, who believed in resurrection and the hereafter, and who cherished the fulfillment of the messianic promises. Now, when I first saw this, or when I first heard of this, I said, oh no, Jesus was Pharisee, or his family was. But remember, Pharisees and Sadducees were like political parties. And the Pharisees believed in the resurrection, the messianic promises. The Sadducees did not. And that's why they say here they probably belong to that sect of the Pharisees, because he was referencing, the resurrection and the messianic things. Okay, that's a repeat. And we see in the Bible, we see in Luke 5:22, he grew in his stature and in his wisdom. Now, this is here because many arguments and many volumes have been written by scholars, whomever, to say and show that Jesus went away to school, so let's say, to get his education. All right, some people said he went to the Essenes, that he went whatever. But the point, this is pointing to the fact that he grew in his stature and in his wisdom in Nazareth. Okay. Now let's look at his childhood. All right. When he was a boy, Jesus sat with other children in a circle at the feet of the rabbi at the synagogue school in Nazareth, where he was taught to read, write, and recite scripture by heart, just as is done today. He attended the synagogue service regularly and thereby acquired more knowledge of the holy book. And then Jesus continued his studies under more learned rabbis as he grew older, who expounded the scriptures, taught the young men the history of their forefathers. So, and I think you hear me say a good bit that Jesus taught from the Torah. Jesus didn't all of what he has said in the Gospels and whatnot. Some people just believe that was all Jesus, and that it was all original by Jesus, but that's not so. Jesus taught from the Torah, but he skillfully made the laws and the commandments. He made them. I think he simplified them in my mind. Okay, because well, that's he simplified them. He made them more understandable to the people of the time. Okay. Now, just a little bit here. Okay, his father Joseph was a handyman in the village. And I put handyman in there because we have the thought of Joseph being a carpenter and building furniture and all of that, which was not the case. And I think that'll come in later. But anyway, Jesus helped his father and also tended the family, sheep, goats, and other animals. He helped Joseph plowing the fields, cutting the grass, and doing other manual work, as all other children in that part of the world do. Jesus played just as other boys play in Galilee. At the age of 5 or 6, he rode on donkeys. He carried a sling and pebbles, a small bow and arrows, and joined with children playing at war, just as children do today. These are statements from Dr. Loms's, and I'll clarify the book. And let me see, but I might have to come back to this. Okay, the significance of also of the fact that Jesus grew up in Nazareth at home, as as a common regular child, is evidenced in the Bible by him talking about sheep, goats, and other vines. He was familiar with all of that, as were the people that he was speaking to. Okay, so Jesus went to the people. He was not a rabbi in a synagogue waiting for people to come and join the synagogue. He went to the people and traveled throughout Galilee mostly, and then Judea, which is where Jerusalem is. He taught outside, in fields, hillsides, wherever. He went to the people. And that too is significant. All right. And now, if you can picture Jesus now, he traveled, okay, and he also told his disciples, okay, they did not travel and carry any food. They didn't have what they called, they had these bags that they would carry stuff in. They had nothing like that. They don't carry any money on them. And because, well, there was two reasons really, but mostly because they counted on God to provide food as needed. And I mean, the food could come from anywhere. The food could come from people that they in different cities that took them in and fed them. It could include just pulling some figs or some ears of grain from along the road, just whatever. And that is the way they traveled. Complete faith on God, in God, and that he would provide. And of course, he always did. And he did not, okay, when you see pictures of men, even today, like Arabs and whatnot, they wear several layers of clothing, and the layers of clothing are indicative of their status in life. But Jesus did not wear many garments. Probably like they had an inner garment, kind of like underwear, I guess, and then maybe one light one, and that's what they wore. The other reason for just the limited garments and no bag or no carrying any money is so that they would not be robbed. And they did rob people of their clothing. Wealthy people that had many layers of clothing, they would rob them. Okay, and he may or may not have worn sandals. Seemingly he did, but I think a lot of people didn't have, shoes or sandals. So you get the picture. You get the picture of Jesus traveling about, teaching the message. Okay. Jesus entered his career, we'll call his career or his mission, whatever, relying on God. Jesus was groomed by God throughout his young life, as we just heard, studying the scriptures, preparing him for his mission. And his mission, his teaching began, he was commissioned by God through the baptism by John. We know about the doves coming down. And he was guided by God always. Jesus had a constant connection with God. And when you look in the Gospels, you see that he may have been preaching somewhere, or he may have talked to someone, and he might have been got a little kind of disturbed maybe or whatnot. But you always see Jesus went and prayed, and he got his instructions from God always. And that is what he taught through the kingdom, or the counsel of God is here now. He taught that, but he followed it 100%. Okay, now there is we have a perception. Christianity has a perception of Jesus as being holy and calm, and not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it is not characteristic of Jesus as a Near Eastern speaker. So Jesus, so you can kind of get this image here, Jesus was a fiery, outspoken, emotional public speaker. And in the tradition of the ancient Near East, and actually I think even now, Near Eastern people, Near Eastern speakers are very, very dramatic, and so Jesus, yes, was that. There's no question about it, that is what he was. And that is missed by people, Christianity, because they honor, they just kind of honor him, and it's okay. They got him on a pedestal, and they just could not picture him like that. But that is what he was. Okay. And now Jesus ate meat, drank wine, mixed freely with sinners, tax gatherers, and outcasts. And remember, that is what he did. He partied. Jesus loved to party. He went to parties when he was invited, because see, he reached common people a lot, but then wealthier people would invite him, and sometimes all of the disciples. But if you can imagine, you'd have to be pretty wealthy and have a pretty good, big place to entertain 13 men. But it did happen. Oh, it did happen, and it happened enough that his enemies, you recall in the scriptures, called him a glutton and a winebibber. But again, that's because, okay, he was not the traditional teacher rabbi. Jesus was totally non-traditional, and no other, even prophets from the past, or no other speakers or rabbis, from the Jewish religion and Jerusalem would have even spoke to sinners or tax people or whatnot. But that was Jesus' mission. Jesus came mainly for sinners, to try and show them the way to God, so that then they would not be sinners. Okay. Now, the other thing that people don't like to think about is that Jesus clearly was a revolutionary. Okay. Jesus sought justice and change. That's what he was all about. See, yes, he did preach. He preached the kingdom, which is what was to bring about this change. Because remember, the world, the Romans had occupied them, but the Jewish government, the Jewish authorities, religion, they too had become corrupt, and the laws. People didn't follow the laws. That it was, and there was corruption in the temple, corruption and so Jesus, Jesus saw this, and so that was his mission, and he taught the kingdom of heaven on earth, because that's what he taught, to try and tell these people. And remember, this was a spiritual kingdom, but still yet, that's what he was trying to teach him. So he was after justice and change. So Jesus knew the letter of the law and the inner meaning of the law. And he had observed the injustice done to the poor, oppressed people, and the harm that caused by the strict enforcement of some of the laws. But mainly we can hang this because Jesus said, "Do not suppose that I have come to weaken the law or the prophets. I have not come to weaken, but to fulfill." And when he's talking about fulfill, we're going to talk about some of the laws here that were totally, well, they were the enforcement of the laws were just not acceptable to Jesus. So he was trying to tell the people, let's really follow the law, because Jesus' main thing was love God, love your neighbor, but that wasn't original with Jesus either. The people who were in the authorities in Jerusalem, they knew that from the Torah, because it's in the Torah, and they knew that the prophets of old had talked about that too, and of course, so did the common people, because they knew the Torah. So he did, he came to fulfill the law, to change the I'm just going to say enforcement of some of these laws, and we'll talk about those. Okay, Jesus was an advocate for the poor and the disenfranchised. Jesus lowered himself to the level of the common people, the tax gatherers and sinners, in order to raise them and lead them into the way of God. He was poor like them and was classified as one of them. But being like one of them, he understood their problems and found remedies for their ills. Okay, now let's look at Jesus. See, some people say and ask the question, because I read some other stuff just to see where tradition lies and whatnot, and people will say, well, did Jesus sin? Because it is contended by many Christian sects that Jesus never sinned. Well, I mean, that's just a whole debate in anything, but sin, in sin in those days meant breaking the law, but it was breaking the law no matter what. So we'll look at the Sabbath, the laws about the Sabbath, to keeping the Sabbath holy. Okay, Now, in the Gospels, you find this one passage where Jesus Jesus' disciples were hungry, okay, and it was the Sabbath, and they were in the field, fields alongside the road, and they were plucking ears of grain to eat on the Sabbath. Well, immediately he was chastised by the Pharisees because the Sabbath was to be strictly enforced, and the disciples eating the ears of grain on the Sabbath was a sin, and it was, I mean, the Sabbath to the Jewish people, even to this day, is very, very strict, okay? And so, but Jesus came back, and Jesus said, to the Pharisee, how can it be a sin to eat on the Sabbath if you are hungry? And Jesus is bringing compassion into the law and whatnot, because it was totally totally unreasonable that the disciples could not. So, and Jesus challenged this, and of course, the authorities didn't care for it, but he always had an answer, and it was a humane answer. I mean, keep the Sabbath holy, yes, but if people are starving and they have to eat, well, then perhaps that's just a little too much enforcement. Okay, and then the another example of this, the Sabbath, is when it was the Sabbath. Jesus was in the synagogue, and a man asked him, would he heal him? Well, Jesus hesitated at first because he knew he was going to have the problem in the Sabbath, because even healing was considered work, and that it was forbidden. But once again, Jesus brought out the lack of compassion here, and he used the example of, if to the Pharisees, he said, if you had a sheep who had gotten lost, was stuck in a thicket, or what else, you mean to tell me that you would not pull that, take that sheep away out of that, and because it was the Sabbath? And so Jesus always had an answer, never an argument, just an answer, and then he walked away. But that's just the Sabbath law. And then you remember the Good Samaritan, and in the Good Samaritan, the laws, okay, the laws prevented the priest and the Levite from helping a dying man on the street. The laws, they came from Leviticus, and the law said that if the priest or the Levite touched anything with blood, it would be unclean. And so that's when Jesus told the story. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan to point that out, without, like I say, he did not debate or anything, but he cleverly told this story. And of course, the Pharisees and the scribes that happened to be there were a little put out, so to speak. But Jesus never argued back with them. Okay. All right. Now, what another thing that people do not realize about Jesus, Jesus was he embraced women's causes. He was an advocate for women. And if you go, you go in the Gospels, this all comes from the Gospels. What had happened? Okay, there were rules for divorce that that were pretty reasonable to start with. But what had happened is there was no enforcement of those rules. And so a man could just arbitrarily dump his wife. And they were doing it. The law didn't say that. The law was they could not arbitrarily dump their wives or drive them out for their homes. But it was like a whole lot of other things that nobody was following the law, and men just, if they wanted to get rid of one of their wives, they just got rid of them, put them out in the street. And women back then they couldn't go to work. There was no means of support for a woman except having a man, or sometimes going back to their original family. So Jesus clarified the law. He clarified the law, and he said, and I believe it was this way to start with, that men could not put their wives out except for adultery. And once again, that he was trying to make this change, make people aware of what was going on, and try to make the change. Okay. And then we looked at, the story of the woman taken in adultery. And the pregnant woman in that story, I don't know, we've done it sometimes in the gospel, but the story says then they brought this woman who was caught actively in adultery. Well, us here in the West, we automatically think, oh my God, they caught her. No, the woman was pregnant, okay, and she wasn't married. And so, but these men brought her to Jesus. And technically, according to the law, she should have been stoned, but perhaps also the man, or the man who was responsible, could have been stoned. But here we have it, no different than today. She was pregnant, but how would you know? How would you know which man, who the father was and whatnot? And so the men, they brought her to Jesus, and Jesus, remember, this is where he sat for a while. He doodled on the ground. He was thinking how he was going to handle this. He was thinking, but he was doodling. I don't know, it says that he was doing something else, but he was really just doodling and thinking. And so he stood up and said, well, oh gosh, I'm sorry. Anyway, let let one of you throw the first stone, or if one of you are guilty, throw the first stone. And skillfully, that's how he did things. He didn't argue or anything. He just thought about it. And so he said that to the men, and the men took off because, Jesus knew that probably one of them was responsible. So Jesus just said to the woman, and again, this, Jesus didn't condemn her. All right. I mean, he knew the situation, but he didn't condemn her because he didn't condemn anybody. And so he just skillfully prevented her from being stoned. There was no stones thrown, and the men who were going to stone got out of there based on Jesus' thing. So he was very much aware. Oops. He was very much aware of the conditions that women were under. He had observed them, and he did his best to try and change things and make things aware for women. Okay, and just Jesus was all inclusive, and that means Jesus was not prejudiced. And though he taught mostly Jewish people at first, because that's what he was instructed to do, he did heal some Gentiles. You read where he did heal Gentiles. And see, he proclaimed God as Father to everybody. And so he proclaimed that all humankind were children of God, his Father, of course. And so in Matthew chapter 5, I think it's like 48. There's the verse is, therefore become perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And that word there means all inclusive. So we're just painting a picture here of Jesus. Now, Jesus was careful about, I think the woman, there was a woman who was a Gentile, so to speak. He was careful about including them or healing them a little bit, because he knew he would get a lot of flack from not just the authorities, but other people, because, people are racist. We got that now. So he was careful, but he did heal that. And then when you think about the woman at the well was a Samaritan. He was in Samaria. And so that's, Jesus was that. And I don't have any notes on it here, but I just saw something that came across. I'm sure it was Facebook. And Jimmy Carter, the former president, he made a statement about that he said I am sure that in Jesus' time there were homosexuals just like we have now, and Jesus never condemned them. And I just thought I'd say that because I thought that was very good. Jimmy Carter, 99 years old. Anyway, okay. And all right. And let's just remember that Jesus was humble. Okay. Jesus did not go around proclaiming, I'm the Messiah, da 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 da. No, he did not do that. And when he was asked, when he was asked, he was arrested, and when he was asked by Herod and Pilate, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say that, not me." Um, and he just never, he did not resist. And Jesus rode on a donkey. That was a very humbling experience, and it was humbling, I'm sure, for the people around, because important people did not ride through the gates of Jerusalem on donkeys. They were on horses and all of that. But again, he was humble. And then remember this week, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And if that's not a humbling experience, I don't know what is. And I just find that to be unimaginable. But he did it, and that's the way it should be. And like in the workplace, okay, we do have the system of you get promotions, and then you're over this and you're over that, and you got someone up here and he's over this guy down here. But that shouldn't matter that he's over it. Everyone should get treated the same. And that's kind of what the Jesus washing the feet was all about. All right. And he was meek. When Jesus was accosted verbally by Pharisees and scribes, he didn't debate or argue. He thought a minute, and he always came out with an explanation, sometimes I call them like calm, little jibes, verbal jibes and whatnot. But he never debated or argued. He taught his disciples not to argue or debate with those who would not welcome them. And certainly there's a lot of them that did not welcome the disciples. And so he just said, look, just shake the dust off your feet and move on. No problem. Don't create problems, just go. And of course, when Jesus was arrested, he did not retaliate. And some people to this day, especially now in this day and age, well, you got to defend yourself, and you got to do this, and that's all they're that's all they're concerned about. But meekness, we don't understand meekness in the world today. Meekness is shunned. Meek, not me. I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna take care of things. Now, this meekness, do nothing is ridiculous. But just think about this. Jesus taught, died on the cross, and resurrected to help others. I mean, that's what he was doing. He was helping, he was teaching, but he was trying to help others, to show us the way to God and to a joyous, loving, peaceful life here on earth now and eternally. Remember, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God is here now. So take it, go and get there. All right. And this is kind of the whole point of the meekness is, but isn't it ironic that this man, Jesus, who was meek and humble, he died a criminal, and he is the most famous man of all time in all the world. And not a day goes by in most parts of the world that Jesus is not talked about. And so, because even, okay, the Muslims, they revered Jesus as a prophet. Okay, so he is part of them. And even now, okay, the Jewish people have their new covenant based on Jesus. And I don't know that they're saying he's the Messiah. No, maybe not. But they also have a part of them. Actually, the Kabbalah, that the Jewish, it's a part of the Jewish, it's the spiritual part of the Jewish religion, so to speak. And they embrace Jesus and his teachings. And so I guess as we, as we celebrate Jesus and his meekness, and he was humble, somehow people need to realize that you can be meek and humble and still be, I guess, if you want to be recognized or whatever, but that's the way Jesus was. And I don't understand why people don't think about this more, don't really feel, don't really know what Jesus was all about, and so that they put down being meek and humble, and then we have all this violence and all this kind of stuff. So that is the last slide. So I hope you got a picture. I hope we painted a picture of Jesus, a different picture than what is, but to me, and I know we talked about Jesus dying on the cross, and we some tough lessons the last two times, but if you want, follow Jesus, and know who he was and when he did. I just think that would help so much, but it really isn't taught like that. So, okay, and once again, thank you for your contributions. We're going to try and we use them to get some more of this message out there, available. And okay, we have published a book of Dr. Lamsa's. Dr. Lamsa just wrote this in the 60s, and it's a very easy read and a good reference book. And in this simple book, very simply, Dr. Lamsa explains where Jesus was. And this little volume, it just makes sense. But there are tons of volumes about where Jesus was and whatnot. But this is Dr. Lamsa. So it is available on two forms, the ebook and paperback. So, okay.